Welcome to Big If True, Season 2, On the Road. Our team drove roughly 350 kilometers north of Toronto for this, the Eganville Leader, a paper that's more than a century old. Founded and independently owned since 1902, it's the largest paid circulation newspaper in Renfrew County, and it is shutting down. The last edition of this paper will be published in February 2026, but the Eganville Leader isn't alone. Hundreds of local newspapers, radio stations, and TV channels have closed down in recent years, right across the country, leaving behind what some call news deserts, communities with little to no reliable local information. Now, Eganville is not there yet, but what happens when this is gone? Hey, the publisher
Molly.
himself.
How are you?
Gerald, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Come on in.
Okay, got some hardware on the walls? For more than 50 years, Gerald Tracy has worked at this Eganville paper.
Molly, this is Judy.
Hey, Judy.
Judy has been with us 35 years.
Wow.
Almost like a little sister. Anna is the newest addition to our staff. Almost a year. She is the little sister.
Okay.
And in here we have Ottawa's Alex Lambert,
Hey,
a
Alex.
young journalist graduate from Algonquin College.
Amazing. Close-knit group here.
Like a family.
For Gerald, the paper isn't just a business, it's a family legacy.
This is my father, Ambrose Tracy. He and his brother Sylvester purchased the paper from Patty in 1944.
Gerald has been working here full-time since he was a teenager, but it's all coming to an end in just a few months.
I'm 72. I've had a couple of health scares. I've had a triple bypass, survived no problem. This past year I had to have a pacemaker put in. So I just got thinking, you know, at that point, it's time to make a move.
How difficult was it to say we're going to close the doors?
It's the toughest, hardest decision I've ever made in my life.
That decision also comes as eyeballs and ad dollars increasingly go online. Still, the reach of this small town newspaper is impressive. Even in a digital world, the paper routinely prints 5,700 copies a week. What is the loss to the community if this paper goes away?
Well, the loss to this community and the wider Renfrew County community is that there's not going to be anyone reporting on what's happening at municipal council meetings, which is number one.
What does that mean?
Well, it means that people are going to be like a mushroom, kept in the dark and fed you know what.
Who's going to hold politicians accountable?
Well, that's the thing. Nobody is going to. Is Facebook going to hold them accountable? You can put anything on social media and get away with it. You don't have to back it up with any facts. And a lot of people swallow this information hook, line, and sinker.
Do you see misinformation swirling in this community?
It's happening all the time. If we respond to a breaking news story, whether it's a house fire, a commercial business fire, a fatality out of town on one of the roadways, you would not believe what's on Facebook by the time we get back to the office.
Give me an example.
Well, we had a fatality just 2 kilometers out of town. When I got back to the office, it was already on Facebook. There were 3 people killed, and one was a flagman who was working in the construction zone. He was killed. And I said, where is this garbage coming from? I was just there.
You were on site.
I was on site.
The truth? One person was tragically killed, not 3. And it was a driver, not a flagman.
And that happens all the time. Like, people they don't think, they just guess.
Loyal to his craft, Gerald has refused to join social media. But soon, he may not have a choice. So where will you get your news?
Where will I get my news? Well, you know what? My wife and I, we have talked about that for the last year since we made the decision to close this. And I said, what are we going to do? She says, I think we might have to get a Facebook account. That's the last thing I want is a Facebook. I want news. I don't want to know what so-and-so had for lunch or dinner at the restaurant last night. Where am I going to get the news? Good question. You talk about news deserts? We are in for one of the larger news deserts in a rural area.
And that's upsetting to many people in the region trying to make sense of what's happening close to home.
It's virtually the only local paper around anymore, and it serves multiple communities in the entire valley. So to lose it is going to be very unfortunate.
When I first got elected, there were 7 weekly, locally owned newspapers in this riding. There essentially is just 3 today, but neither of the other 2 have the scope or the circulation or the history that the Eganville Leader does. And I'll tell you, when that disappears, if that disappears, I'm an optimist as well, there is going to be a gap that I don't think can be filled in the same way that it is being filled today.
The seniors, who are a huge part of rural Ontario, are going to not see what's going on in the world. They're not going to know what's going on in their neighbors, election issues, community events. There's a number of things that's going to affect people for.
What's the danger in that?
Misinformation, miscommunication.
I was at a little chip stand here, and there was a woman. She recognized me, and I had no idea who she was. She said, "Have they found a buyer for the paper yet?" And I said, "No, not yet." She says, "Well, I live in Griffith, which is about 30, 40 minutes away, community of maybe 75 people." She says, "I don't know what we're going to do without it." And like, that's constant. No matter where you go, no matter what you cover, you're getting these inquiries from people. So there's going to be a huge void.
What's scary is that Eganville is not alone. Back in Toronto, researchers are seeing this trend right across the country.
Well, I think of news deserts as a place where there is no local news and no local reporting at all. And what there is a lot of what I call local news poverty, which is places that have a little bit of that type of reporting, but not enough to meet the needs of the community.
April Lindgren is a former journalist turned academic who has been tracking the decline of local news in Canada for roughly 15 years. She's found that since 2008, around 600 news outlets have shut down across the country, with some of the steepest losses in smaller centers.
75% of those 600 or so closings have been community newspapers. They've just really borne the brunt of the economic and technological change.
So small communities, small Canada getting hammered here.
Yes, I mean, although there's lots of community papers in larger centres that have closed as well. But when we look more deeply at the data, what we find is the largest number of closings have happened in places with fewer than 20,000 people.
That's not news to Gerald.
Founder of the paper, Patrick McHugh. Isn't that neat?
Who has watched this happen in his own backyard.
I saw the Metroland sweep in the 70s, 80s, 90s, where Metroland and Postmedia bought up all kinds of community newspapers across the country, particularly Ontario. And sadly, like, the majority of those papers do not exist anymore.
So what is lost, April, when reporters are not pounding the pavement in their local communities?
One thing that I think is lost is the ability for people to participate more effectively in decisions in their community that get made in the places where they live.
They don't know about them.
Well, they don't, right? So I use the example often of a city council decides to build a major highway, and it's going in at the end of your street. But the first time you hear anything about it is when you see the bulldozers show up. And then, of course, you're infuriated. Like, why didn't I know? You phone your counselor, you're yelling at your counselor, because there was no coverage. Nobody was reporting on this issue when it was at the committee level.
Mayors in small-town Canada are bracing for the backlash from bad information. Ron Jerva leads the seat of the county in Pembroke, an area served by the Eganville Leader.
It's a challenge. We have a communications officer doubling also as economic development, and already she's trying to do mayor's messages on different topics. That's my way of trying to get ahead of it and being able to say to the public, no, this is the situation on a particular topic, because I know if I don't do that, some will use that as an opportunity to perhaps put out information that's not entirely accurate.
Mayor, what do you think the difference is between, misinformation spreading in a smaller community versus like a big city center?
So perhaps the challenge with, in terms of misinformation, is in a larger center. I would like to think that there's other means more means to obtain information. So whether it's, let's say pick on Ottawa, you have the Ottawa Citizen, you have other means of obtaining your information. In smaller municipalities, you don't have that ability. So when you lose a newspaper, which is sometimes the singular source of information for a lot of people, particularly seniors, it's devastating.
We may not know the impact of this for like years to come, but from your standpoint, is it purely negative?
I think anytime you take away the ability to get accurate information to the public, it's negative.
The loss of a newspaper that gives us the information, every Wednesday, accurately, with very little bias, we are going to miss that.
And what do you think that will do to this community?
Myself and my colleagues, not only on my Bonnechere Valley Council, but County Council, we have some concerns about the amount of social media misinformation, disinformation that will be out there. I think it's wonderful that all of our councils are on YouTube now, especially at the county, you're 8 hours long. So for the newspaper to be able to disseminate that 8-hour meeting into their news articles was priceless.
If nobody's producing that, verified, timely, independent news, there's just a vacuum. And what goes in there? Well, what they're calling in the States pink slime.
Pink slime, aka cheap filler in processing meat and fast food, is also a term for websites that look like local news outlets but are typically made up of PR or partisan content. In recent years, the Columbia Journalism School identified what it called a pink slime network under the name Metric Media, with more than 1,100 questionable websites linked to it. Interestingly, some other research suggests people are not consuming more low-quality sites. But that might just be because many Americans turn to national news instead. In Canada, the research on this topic is lacking. But we have a more complicated problem here. We can't access national news or any news on some major social media platforms. Big If True has talked about it before. Remember Bill C-18, the Online News Act? An attempt by the Liberal government to get big tech to pay news organizations for their work. But it backfired. And Meta, the biggest player in the Canadian social media landscape, simply blocked all news content from its platforms. News organizations have undoubtedly suffered. But what's more interesting is 3/4 of Canadians weren't even aware of this ban. Not only are Canadians not aware of this ban, 44% still turn to social media accounts to get their news. So what's showing up on social media now that real news is gone? The New York Times took a closer look.
What they're finding there instead is hyper-partisan, meme-like content that leans mostly toward the conservative side, as well as straight-up fake ads and disinformation relating to the political campaigns.
Here in Canada, April worries about the junk people are consuming online.
Nobody knows what's real anymore and what's true, and they don't know how to check it, and they don't know where to go to find out what's true. So there's this vacuum that creates a space for misinformation to pollute the information ecology of the communities.
And that vacuum has expanded over the past few years. It's not just the loss of print, it's broadcast too. Public engagement and community strategies expert Sonia McDonald says that leaves Canada vulnerable to misinformation. She's co-authored this report for the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives.
So in 2023, we saw the largest hit in print journalism, with a massive reduction in print newspapers, local newspapers closing across the country. In 2024, we saw a similar thing happen in broadcasting and local broadcasting, where there was Chorus and other commercial national broadcasters who owned local TV stations and radio stations across the country just shuttered those radio stations and TV stations. And so all of a sudden there was a massive reduction in the number of local television, radio broadcasting available in communities across the country.
So why is this happening now? Well, news has always relied to a certain extent on ad dollars. Advertisers pay top dollar for primetime slots and prime positions. While that may have worked in the past, Sonia's report points to two perfect storms that drastically changed the industry. First, Starting in the late 80s, owners started purchasing multiple media properties. The thinking was that media consolidation would open up more advertising revenue. Plus, outlets could centralize their production costs, meaning they could also cut back on news coverage and local journalists.
In Canada, since the late 1980s, we've seen a raft of media concentration and consolidation. So we're sitting in Hamilton today, and so we had the Hamilton Spectator, which was locally owned, and then that became part of the Southern Group, and then the Southern Group got bought up, newspaper chain got bought up through a litany of different purchases, and it is very much like Pac-Man.
At the same time, people were discovering the internet. Advertisers realized they could get eyeballs online, often faster and cheaper than before.
So if we look at the digital shift, since the late 1990s till now, we've seen everything go online, everything from public services to obviously all of our media. That shift was very bumpy for commercial media in a lot of ways because their models are reliant on advertising. What then happened is, as we saw news move online, all of a sudden the advertising got more difficult and people weren't subscribing anymore because they could get their news for free often. And the same advertisers, they couldn't transition that advertising market in the same way. And so one of the things they did was they tried to go behind paywalls, which was get a new form of subscription base, is to get you and I to pay for a subscription to then access that news online.
The shift in the subscription model couldn't make up for a loss of advertising revenue, and local news kept shrinking. There's also the obvious.
I'd like to pull out 1968.
Owners of some local newsrooms are aging out of the business, and there's no one left to take the reins.
This is my father when he died.
I did a survey of community newspapers a few years ago, and one of the findings we had was the average age of people running these publications was much older, skewed towards the older end of the age spectrum. And there's a real problem with finding people to take over. And so I think there's a wave of that coming. It sounds like Eganville is one of those places that's been a victim of that.
I think many young people would say, I can take out my phone, I can go to a community event and tell you what's going on and connect with people on TikTok or Instagram. Do you not think that would work here?
Well, it will eventually because there won't be any choice. But it's going to it'll take a generation or two until the transition is completed.
And in that gap, you see loads of misinformation.
Or no information.
How many Canadians are being impacted by these changes?
We assess that about 2.5 million Canadians are almost completely without any local outlets.
2.5
million Canadians across the country. And again, the picture is very different provincially. Provinces like Newfoundland, Manitoba, and Quebec and PEI were worse hit than others. In Newfoundland, you see, I think it was a 73% reduction in newspaper outlets, local newspaper outlets across the province.
So we decided to check in on a couple of those small communities on the Bonavista Peninsula in Newfoundland.
Thanks for having me. Hopefully I can be of some help.
Barbara Dean Simmons is a former editor of Clarenville's local newspaper, The Packet. The paper's local coverage spanned 99 communities in that region. It shut down during COVID.
Barbara, can you describe, what local news is available in and around your area?
So right now, there's not much, if any, local news. People are getting lost on social media, and nobody really has a good idea of where to go to get that hyper-local, totally focused news.
We visited a town in small town Ontario, and that's the same feeling with the potential loss of their paper. And what has been the fallout of not having local news in and around your communities?
I see, on social media, on Facebook in particular, because that's the medium that most folks here tend to gravitate towards. And I see so many dialogues and discussions on there based on rumors, innuendo, and unfortunately, what exists on social media today is bots that influencers, people with agendas who take over discussions. And for instance, there was a so-called nurse who was saying that, you know, the COVID vaccinations were not being supported by the medical community. And I had this discussion with a friend who pointed this out to me, and I said, well, show me the post. And she said, well, I'm not sure where it is, but a friend told me. So me being me, did a lot of Googling and found this so-called nurse and was able to prove to my friend that what you're listening to is an influencer.
Barbara, I understand that sometimes you go on Facebook and you fact-checked things in real time. How's that going?
It's pretty time consuming. Sometimes it feels like you're swimming up a powerful stream of disinformation and you're just one person trying to push back on that, and it gets to be tiring.
This report from the Public Policy Forum focused on the importance of local news to democracy. It highlighted a rumor that spread in the lead up to the recent federal election. The claim that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was going to cut funding to a federal agency that supports businesses in the Atlantic region. That rumor was false.
That would have been a question that local journalists would have put to local candidates. It would have been a key issue and a key headline going through the election. We would have delved into that early and set the record straight.
So people are missing out on vital information here. Good information.
They are. They certainly are.
What's happening in Barbara's community may soon be a reality in Eganville, a town proud of its paper and publisher. The historic newspaper has weathered massive change before.
Oh, wow. This is a walk through history. So the Eganville Leader has been through all of this.
All of this, yeah. Right, it's gone through every evolution of the printing industry.
But it's struggling to find someone to carry on its legacy.
I would love if there was a successor. There's no one in the family who's groomed to take over. There just isn't another generation. I would love to see someone take over the paper who is from Renfrew County, understands the county, understands the people, understands the tolerance level of the people. Renfrew County is a very unique and interesting area. It's probably one of the best places in the world to live.
How do you say goodbye?
How do you say goodbye? Well, when you open up some of the events that you covered and you look at some of the pictures and you say, oh my God, there's so-and-so. Every picture or everything that you covered brings back a memory from that day. Like, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with all of that, but I somehow do want to make sure that it's preserved, because we just don't report the news in a community like this. We record its history.
When you're talking to me, I see your eyes welling up a little bit.
Oh, it's tough. You try not to think of that, because life will go on. It won't be the same.
When you turn off the lights here, what do you want the Eganville Leader to be remembered by?
So I would just like people to remember it as being an integral part of the community, integral part of their lives. We cannot have a society where there are no news reporters. Lots of people want to report the news, but they want to report what they want to report, right? You got to report the facts, and we got to have news in the future. That's just crucial to the survival of society.